My name is Deborah.
Hey guys, it's Karen, my review for this week's episode of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, Season 4, Episode 2, I Am Ashamed. And going into this episode, I was a little bit conflicted with what was really going to happen here, because again, they've been very hush-hush about the season, going as far as to release like 10-second previews for every single episode, which is cool because we never really know what to expect. But on the other hand, I heard that, this half of the season was going to be a lot more episodic, and hearing this was going to be a Halloween episode was not something I was that excited for. But it turns out I actually really love this episode a lot. In fact, I do think this episode was a little bit stronger than episode 1. That being said, not as much happened in this episode. There's not really a ton to talk about here because a lot of it is not necessarily filler, but it's not really a lot to say. A lot of the things that do go on are just really fun, but I still really did enjoy this episode a lot, and we're just going to get into it right now. So the main thing going on in this episode, of course, is with Rebecca, who I really loved her plot line this episode. Her coming out of jail. I was expecting for us to see some of her and those prisoners, which we don't really get to see in this episode. I'll get to that a little bit later on, but her big arc in this episode is that she is now very much secluded, after getting out of prison. She doesn't want to leave the house because everyone is writing these terrible comments about her. Everyone's calling her, a serial killer and saying that she killed this innocent guy. Going as far as to see people like Anna from season 2 saying that, oh yeah, she would totally do this, and being on the side that she is very much against her and thinks she's crazy. And you can see that this really gives Rebecca the idea to just stay in the house and to try to shield herself from all of this really bad publicity. And through doing so, she ends up missing out on a lot of things. There's this Hocus Pocus movie that Paula, Heather, and Valencia, are really trying to get her to go to because she's a big fan of Hocus Pocus. It's a 25th anniversary. Kathy and Jimmy is, her favorite part of it. And I like the way that did play a part in the episode. And I thought that plotline overall was rock solid. I really did like this idea, but especially what keeps her from from going outside is this ridiculous murder thing that she finds out about with this girl named Devin. She was murdered back in 2015 through like this poop crime or whatever, and she finds herself very much invested in it to the point where she doesn't want to do anything else. She just wants to stay singularly focused on this murder. And there were a lot of things that do, contribute to this. We see that all this crazy stuff starts happening with the seance and things like that. But I really like seeing the way that Valencia, Heather, and Paula went about this. Paula and Heather are very much trying to tell her to, just knock it off. That this is clearly just her trying to find a reason to stay inside the house and not try to venture elsewhere, while Valencia actually is intrigued. She actually wants to get more into the history of what's going on with Devin. It's very obvious that this isn't actually something that is that big of a deal, and that again, Rebecca is just kind of doing this to stay inside the house. But I do think they did a good job of playing with some of the Halloween themes of this episode, with the table shaking or all those weird things happening. You knew very well that there was no way that the spirit of Devin was actually haunting them. But for the moment, I did think it was fun, and I enjoyed the way they did handle that. But I thought the culmination of this arc is really what drove it home for me. That moment where Rebecca is talking to Devin from her grave, because they end up going to her cemetery, realizing that it is the 5th anniversary of her, or 4th or 5th anniversary of her death, and they end up going to her grave, and Rebecca gives her this really big speech, and she says a lot of important things here that I think are really kind of a coping mechanism for Rebecca. This was really her way of giving herself that therapy that she really did need, where she tells Devin that it is okay to try to let go of the past. It is okay to try to move on from it. It seems hard, but you have to, and you can see that Rebecca's starting to realize that she has to do the same thing. She can't keep dwelling on things like what she did to Anna. She can't keep dwelling on these really trivial things like what her and Josh could have been, or what she could have done to make Nathaniel in a better place, or what she could have done to keep Greg from staying. But these are things that happen, and she just has to deal with it, and it's hard, but you see that she really does have to move on from it. And I thought that scene was just so well performed by Rachel Bloom, but again, really just showed why this was so important for Rebecca. It wasn't because she was invested in the murder, it's because she saw that Devin was someone who, you know, she was dwelling on and had a very troubled past, and she never really got to, you know, abandon it, and she's showing her that it is possible. And I like that Rebecca, the growth that is happening with her, I really do love seeing a lot. And I do think this was a very good move for Rebecca's storyline overall, and I think they did a very good job with that in this episode. And especially the way the episode wrapped up, I thought it was actually a very strong ending where we realized that while some people do view Rebecca as this killer, some view her as a hero. And sure, maybe they are kind of, you know, defining her by this, and she's just going to be known as this, but you can see that Rebecca, she's ready to face reality. She's ready to face the fact that people have things to say about her, that people are not necessarily agreeing with what happened, and I really did like seeing that, you know, improvement for Rebecca. Rebecca, seasons ago, she would try to avoid this, and I like seeing that she was actually able to kind of break that cycle and is trying to move forward as a character, and I do think it is a really good move for her in this last season. And I'm hoping that she does continue that growth in a way that really does move her forward as a person overall. Now, as far as the other plot lines going on this episode, there wasn't really anything that big happening, but I still thought they were very well done, particularly the storyline with Daryl, because I've said this so many times, I think Daryl is the most underutilized character of this entire show. Sure, last season they did a lot with him, but the only plot line we had with him last season was between him, White Josh, and him trying to adopt this baby. Now we are really seeing the effects of that. We're seeing why he really wanted to do that. And a lot of people were wondering, you know, when that was going on, why did Daryl even want to adopt a baby if he already had a daughter? And we're already seeing that he's basically doing this to make up for the mistakes that he did make with his, you know, real daughter, and trying to kind of make up for that lost time. And I really did like getting into this arc with him. Especially with the way we set this up. I really love this idea that Daryl felt like he wasn't enough, that he, you know, that Rebecca wasn't going to have a good childhood because she didn't have that maternal figure. It was just him. He didn't have someone else to raise this baby with him. And the way he factors White Josh into it, I really did enjoy. They did a good job, I think, in this episode of finding a way to keep White Josh on the show, but not giving him a pointless storyline. There was a very good reason why he was here, because sure, these two are broken up, but they're still very good friends. They're still going to keep in touch, and White Josh, we know, doesn't like Halloween, so I like seeing White Josh actually tend to this baby, and having Josh come in as well, the two of them, kind of the back and forth between them, it reminded me of season 1 days, and I really did enjoy seeing that a lot. And Daryl's constant paranoia and constant worry that something wrong was going to happen was very funny, but also said a lot about the character. You can tell that he is very apprehensive. He really isn't sure if he is fit to raise this baby on his own, and he's trying to do the best he can. And I thought that was definitely a very well done scene when we see that White Josh and Josh tell him that he really doesn't have much to worry about, and that it went very well with Rebecca. And you see them, you know, tending to her. Josh went as far as to buy her a costume. And look, you can see this as Josh trying to do this because, oh, you know, he can't be with Rebecca and he's trying to make up for it or whatever. And sure, you can see it as that. But again, I do think Josh is trying to become a better person. He's trying to become a bit less selfish, which we've seen in the past Josh does not really know how to do. He doesn't know how to do something, you know, that isn't for himself. And I like seeing that Josh is actually trying to do that. And I think they're doing a good job, again, with keeping Josh on the show in a way that doesn't feel like he's overstayed his welcome. And I did enjoy that here. But what I really loved about this storyline was the last scene when he is talking to, you know, his real daughter, and not only does, you know, his ex-wife comment on the fact that, sure, there was the breast milk and things like that, but, you know, he did a really great job, and especially when it comes to his daughter's costume, which he did pick out himself, it turned out very well for him. So it shows this really great message that, sure, you know, it'd be great to have that maternal figure, but it's fine if there only is one parent. And I thought that was a really good story for Daryl overall, and one of the better stories I've seen from him in a little bit. I think the past season they became a bit unfocused with his character, and I think this season he's getting back on track, and I'm liking where they're going with him overall. They're doing a good job this season of not really forgetting any characters, and this was a very good example of that. And then very quickly, I do want to talk about Nathaniel's storyline. Not really much to say here. Essentially, this focused more on the control between him and his dad, but really his dad's focus on the firm in general, and how his dad just felt he wasn't fit to run the firm on his own. So he brings in this new guy named Bert, and Bert immediately sways over all of White Feather and Associates. Everyone is really charmed by him, and Nathaniel just isn't into it. He feels that Bert has taken over way too much, and he doesn't like the atmosphere that Bert is really having, going as far as to hire a private going as far as to hire a private detective to try to document any sort of findings on Bert that may possibly be unsavory, something that may possibly get him demoted from office. And you can just see how much this really did get to Nathaniel. And I liked Nathaniel having a storyline this episode that wasn't having to pertain to Rebecca. It showed that Nathaniel is a great character on his own, and they did a really great job with that here. And I especially love the scene between him and his father, because, up to this point, we got in the sense that his father has a huge disregard for Nathaniel, but we very quickly see that this is actually not the case. In fact, his father brought in Bert to see how Nathaniel would handle, and he's realized that, Bert does have a history of mental illness, and there are various things that are going on, and he wants to do what's best for the firm, and what's best for the firm is to keep Nathaniel in as the head, and I really love seeing that. I like that relationship. It shows that Nathaniel's father is not nearly as callous and uncaring as he thought he was, and I really love the way that was done, but the ending is what especially has me intrigued, where we realize that Bert is going to stay on. Nathaniel thinks he's just going to be a silent partner, but Bert is going to stay there. He says that he needs them, going as far as to rename the branch Mountaintop, which everyone seems to enjoy, and he still is including all the partners' names underneath, and basically says that, they very much are stuck with him, and he can't get rid of him just yet, and I'm interested in seeing how this Bert and Nathaniel conflict is going to go. Again, it's a good way of giving Nathaniel something to do, but not necessarily having to do with Rebecca. Scott Michael Foster is really great in the Nathaniel Plimpton role. He really has shown a lot of layers that this character does have, and I think this is only going to move him forward as a character, and I really love seeing that a lot. And that's really all there is to say in terms of the things I like story-wise, but I do want to get into some of the more technical stuff, because this episode was not perfect. There were some things that I did have a bit of a problem with. One of my issues was the songs. While I did enjoy the songs in this episode, I thought both the musical numbers were really good, both of them end up being kind of unnecessary. I will just get it out of the way right now. Easily the best song of this episode was The Cringe, but I will definitely say Patton Oswalt's appearance was very unnecessary. It felt like the only reason they brought him back is because they could. Because of the last season, they tried to get as many people in there as possible. And I enjoyed the sequence. Like, I understood that they were trying to illustrate that point of the episode really being about trying to abandon your past and trying to make up for, not trying to, accept that it happened and try to move on from it. I did enjoy that, but his whole musical number really didn't lead to much of anything. It was funny, and I enjoyed what we got out of it, but it just felt kind of out of place, and it came out of nowhere, really. Like, 1 second, Rebecca's having this really nice talk with Devin and talking about everything that she's done wrong, but next we have this really comical scene with Patton Oswalt, and I understand the show wants to keep that nice blend of humor and, emotion. I think they do a good job with that overall, but just to me, I just felt the scene was a bit out of place, and we didn't really need it there. Also, the Hocus Pocus thing, I never really understood the point of it, because Rebecca never really ended up meeting with Kathy and Jimmy. It did kind of feel like the show just kind of put that in there because it is Hocus Pocus's 25th anniversary. I think they did a good job of trying to make this the thing that would get Rebecca out of bed, but it really didn't end up going much of anywhere, and I wasn't the hugest fan of it. In terms of the other musical number here, Now It's Time to Seize the Day, this one did have a bit more context in the episode. You know, it was much more about Rebecca just kind of procrastinating and trying to find reasons why she should stay inside the house. But that being said, it really was not anything that big. It wasn't really that big of a song for Rebecca. It was kind of generic. I enjoyed it. It was very funny. I especially love the line where she, you know, we hear about her masturbating and then we cut to it and she's doing other things. I mean, it was very relatable in that sense. There's so many times where like I try to study on like a paper or something like that, or I'm trying to do a paper and I'll just constantly get distracted by other things. So it was very relatable in that sense. But again, the songs in this episode did not really do much to move the plot forward, and that's something that Crazy Ex-Girlfriend does a lot, and this episode just didn't really feel that way to me. Also, I will address the elephant in the room. The intro of this episode, how do I feel about it? I'm going to be honest, I'm not the biggest fan. I do enjoy it. I think it is definitely a very funny intro. The idea that, you know, Rebecca's just such a complex character that we can't really characterize her, so we want to focus on someone a little bit less complex. I understand that. But there just wasn't really a lot going on with this one. Every single intro has, I think, done a beautiful job of really honing in on Rebecca's mental state at that given time. Season 1 showing how, you know, she was trying to ignore her mental illness and mask it by, you know, her just wanting to move to West Covina and, you know, moving there for Josh and trying to admit that she didn't move there for him and there were other things that got in the way. Season 2, her basically just trying to mask all of that by saying that she was in love. And Season 3, her accepting the fact that she's crazy. And you can still say that Season 4 is like that because of the fact that now it isn't really focusing on her mental illness and she's just kind of accepted it. But compared to the other intros, this is easily the weakest for me. I like the 90s sitcom parody. I think it's a cool idea. But to me, it just felt like a random intro, and I was a little bit disappointed by it overall. That being said, while these songs this week weren't really the best songs of the show, they still were a highlight. They still were something I very much enjoyed. And that also pertains to the humor, which I thought was definitely really great here. There were so many great lines in this episode. I mean, so many callbacks to Season 1, which I really enjoyed a lot. But some of the best stuff in this episode for me was the whole recurring joke with Hector's take on Hocus Pocus, them going back and forth about it. I thought that was really funny. But also the scene where Valencia is talking about how the reason that she was so into the Devon murders because she was haunted by John Candy, despite not actually knowing who he is and going as far as to then research him. That was great. That was so typical Valencia, and I really loved that a lot. I thought that was definitely a really funny line overall. But the two things that really did stick out in my mind this episode is, one, the scene where everyone is in the office at White Feather and Associates, and they're all dressed in a Halloween costume except for Nathaniel, and we see Maya, and Maya continues to get the best lines where she says that she's not Katy Perry, she's going as Katy Berry, and Esther Povitsky, I mean, she just kills it with this character. I always wish that they make Maya more of a mainstay, but I understand she has her own show now, so they got to show her in a more recurring capacity, but I've always loved Maya. You know, I think she's one of the funniest characters on the show, and she never fails to make me laugh. I was very happy to see her again here. And the running gag of the episode where Heather was bringing up the fact that Rebecca kept clogging the toilet with her tampons, and us realizing that all of the shaking was going on because of a clog in the pipes. That was just great. It not only did that joke have such a great setup, but it had such a gut punch of a punchline, and I love that so much, and I think they did such a great job with that. I really enjoyed that a lot. Overall, this was a very good episode. I think this was definitely a very fun episode overall. No, it was not the most deep. No, it was not the most complex, but it still was a very good arc for Rebecca. It inched Daryl and Nathaniel forward as characters in a way that I thought was, they did in a way that wasn't too big, but it definitely did set up some intriguing storylines for them. And above all, it seems like the show is trying to go back into Season 1 territory, where the first half of the season, they're going to be more lighthearted one-offs, and I am all for that, because of the fact that there's a lot of show to go. There's still a lot of season to go. A lot can still happen within the season. So I don't really have a problem that they're a little bit more slow paced with it. I don't have a problem that they're taking their time with the story, because they actually have the time to do that. Seasons 2 and 3 felt very rushed for this reason, and I like the fact that Season 4 so far is kind of taking its time with that. And I think they're doing a good job with that overall. But like I said, guys, I still really enjoyed this episode a lot, despite the fact that some things I think could have been a little bit better. I still really did enjoy it, and I am going to give the second episode of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend Season 4 overall a B+. But over, guys, to my review of this week's episode of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Let me know what you guys saw this episode overall, left your thoughts, and we'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.
We do the cringe.
It was not my best work.
We do the cringe.
In fairness, I was also high.
We do the cringe.
Regret can be a blast when nothing is as funky as what lurks in your past.